On a chilly November morning in 1961, a commuter train rolled into St. Louis Union Station, just like any other day. But moments later, a sudden explosion ripped through the baggage car, injuring dozens and halting operations across the Midwest. Authorities blamed a faulty propane heater. Case closed. But 30 years later, declassified CIA documents reveal something far more sinister. The train was carrying sensitive evidence linked to money laundering through a powerful governor's political campaign. What happened on that platform wasn't an accident, it was a message. And someone made sure the truth stayed buried for decades. Stay with us, because the deeper you dig into this case, the more dangerous it gets.
November 17, 1961, began like any other cold Midwestern day. The 7:45 a.m. commuter train was en route from Springfield to St. Louis, carrying its usual mix of office workers, students, and a handful of federal couriers. Passengers described the ride as calm and uneventful, until the train pulled into Union Station. At exactly 9:02 a.m., as porters began unloading bags, an explosion erupted in the baggage car. Shattered glass, flying debris, and a wave of panic turned the Grand Terminal into a war zone. Emergency services were on site within minutes. 32 people were injured, 6 critically. Miraculously, no one died. Initial reports blamed a faulty propane heater stored near parcels and trunks. Investigations were brief and inconclusive. Within 2 weeks, the press moved on. But some things didn't add up. Despite the injuries and the high-profile location, there was surprisingly little federal involvement in the aftermath. The FBI issued a short statement. Local police conducted interviews, yet no one followed up on why several federal couriers had been assigned to that train, or why some of their bags had mysteriously disappeared after the explosion. Union Station staff were told not to speak to reporters. Security camera footage, limited at the time, vanished. One baggage handler later claimed in a private letter to his sister that 2 men in suits had entered the car minutes before the blast and were never seen again. Fast forward to 1993. An investigative journalist named Louise Grady, working on a book about unsolved political scandals of the 1960s, uncovered a redacted CIA memo buried in an unrelated file. The memo mentioned a containment operation at STL Rail Terminal, executed per Domestic Security Protocol, dated November 1961. Grady filed multiple FOIA requests. After years of stonewalling, she received access to heavily redacted files referencing a political figure from Missouri coded as Gov 9. Cross-referencing timelines and campaign finance records, Grady made a chilling discovery. The governor in office at the time, Edgar Meacham, was under secret investigation for laundering campaign funds through front companies tied to railroad logistics. And one of the bags destroyed in the blast, it was supposed to carry ledger books that tied Meacham to offshore accounts. In 1995, Grady tracked down Daniel F. Lefferts, a retired postal inspector who had been assigned to train security in the early 60s. After repeated calls, he agreed to meet her. But Lefferts never showed up. His body was found 2 days later in a wooded area outside Rolla, Missouri. Ruled a suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, the case was quietly closed. Grady received anonymous threats for months after, warning her to drop the story. Still, she kept digging. Several key pieces of evidence from the explosion, such as fragments of the baggage car, burned luggage, and even medical reports, were lost in transit between St. Louis and Washington. Union Station's internal incident logs from that day were also removed from archives sometime in the late 1980s. One passenger, Thomas Raymore, who suffered facial injuries from the blast, later testified that he'd overheard 2 men arguing over a locked crate during the ride. His testimony was recorded by a local reporter but was never published. Raymore died in a suspicious house fire 6 months later. Governor Meacham, once considered a rising star in national politics, suddenly resigned in January 1962, just weeks after the explosion. At the time, he cited family illness as the reason. But new records uncovered by Grady show that days before stepping down, Meacham received a classified briefing from federal agents. Whatever was said in that room ended his career. He spent the rest of his life in obscurity and refused all interviews. The most chilling detail emerged from a single page in the CIA's Domestic Operations Division archives. It referenced Project Gray Fog, a covert domestic interference campaign targeting internal destabilization threats via transportation infrastructure. While most of the file remains redacted, one sentence stands out. Target material compromised, operation successful, secondary collateral within acceptable limits. Was the train bombing part of a Black Ops cleanup mission? And how many more incidents like this were buried in plain sight? In 2001, Grady received an unmarked package with microfilm reels. On them were copies of ledger pages listing Meacham's campaign contributions, some of which matched financial transfers through railway subsidiaries. But just as she prepared to go public, Grady disappeared. Her apartment was found undisturbed. Her manuscript, notes, and hard drives were gone. To this day, her fate remains unknown. The Union Station bombing never received a formal reopening of the investigation. Most Americans have never heard of it. It remains a footnote in transportation history, written off as a freak accident. But for those who've dared to look closer, the signs of conspiracy are impossible to ignore. Vanishing evidence, silenced witnesses, political fallout, and covert intelligence signatures. It wasn't just a bomb. It was a message. What started as a routine morning commute ended as a carefully orchestrated cover-up. The truth was loaded into a baggage car and destroyed before it could ever see daylight. And somewhere, deep in sealed government vaults, the full story waits. Stay tuned, because the further we ride into America's forgotten railways, the more explosive the secrets become.
In the final months of 1945, as Europe lay in ruins and the world exhaled in fragile peace, one train departed from the war-torn city of Königsberg. It was train number 5717, a heavily guarded Soviet transport carrying high-ranking German prisoners of war, confiscated Nazi materials, and, allegedly, secret archives. Its destination, Moscow. But it never arrived. No wreckage. No survivors. No official explanation. More than 80 years later, the fate of Train 5717 remains one of the most chilling and unexplained disappearances in Soviet history. And what's even more disturbing, the Soviet government never acknowledged it ever existed. The war had ended, but the movement of men, weapons, and war spoils was far from over. Soviet forces controlled much of Eastern Europe, and massive convoys carried everything of value eastward, including prisoners of war. Train number 5717 left Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, in late October 1945. It was no ordinary train. According to unofficial records later revealed by ex-military personnel, it carried approximately 173 individuals, including 39 German officers, several NKVD agents, Soviet military intelligence, boxes of confiscated artworks, documents, and precision instruments taken from German facilities, and, allegedly, secret archives. Its destination, Moscow. But it never arrived. No wreckage, no survivors. No official explanation. Somewhere after departing Vilnius, the train vanished from all records. Telegraph messages stopped.
No stations along the route logged its passing. The train was scheduled to reach Smolensk on the third night. It never did. The first official concern was raised by the Smolensk station master, who reported the missing convoy. Inquiries were made discreetly. Internal NKVD documents, declassified only in the 1990s, reveal a Level 5 security incident was declared. Local authorities were mobilized to comb the dense Belarusian forests and abandon tracks. No evidence of derailment, sabotage, or attack was ever found. In fact, no trace of the train at all. At the time, the Soviet Union never acknowledged the train or its disappearance publicly. It was buried beneath layers of secrecy. Theory 1. Internal Soviet cover-up. Some historians suggest the train was sabotaged by Soviet agents themselves, possibly to eliminate specific high-value prisoners or to conceal sensitive cargo. One theory claims the German officers had knowledge of Soviet war crimes or possession of stolen Allied intelligence. Theory 2, the train was rerouted intentionally. Another possibility is that the train was quietly diverted and its passengers executed or imprisoned indefinitely in Siberia. There are vague mentions in some Gulag records of special German units arriving in late 1945, but no names match. Theory 3, Western involvement. A much rarer theory proposes that the train was intercepted by Allied operatives, possibly British intelligence, to secure critical Nazi documents before they reached Moscow. This theory is based on fragmented OSS reports, the forerunner to the CIA, but has never been confirmed. In 1991, with the collapse of the USSR, a handful of military officers came forward with their recollections. One, Lieutenant Sergei A., claimed, "The train was loaded with more than just prisoners. There were crates that none of us were allowed near. We heard whispers of uranium materials, plans, and something called Project Morgenrot. Then the train just disappeared. We were told to forget it or face consequences." Even more chilling, a retired signal operator from a rural Belarusian station recounted how they saw the train pass at night, completely blacked out, never to return. But no official logs support his claim. Over the years, amateur historians and independent researchers have attempted to find remnants of Train 5717. Some believe it's buried beneath collapsed tunnels from now abandoned wartime infrastructure. Others think the train was dismantled in secret and its parts redistributed. There's even speculation about hidden Soviet test sites deep in Belarus where the passengers may have been taken for medical or military experimentation. Though these theories remain speculative, the silence from official Russian archives only fuels the mystery. To this day, no formal investigation has ever been completed. So what really happened to train number 5717? Was it lost to sabotage, deliberately erased from history, or was it part of a larger Soviet effort to hide something far more sinister than mere war spoils? We may never know the full truth, but one thing is certain: the train left Königsberg. It never arrived in Moscow, and nobody ever saw it again. If you found this story gripping, share your theories in the comments. What do you think happened to Train 5717? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more forgotten Cold War mysteries.
Imagine boarding a night train, tired but relieved to be heading home. The carriage is crowded, too crowded, but you tell yourself it's only for a few hours. You lean against the window, staring into the blackness of the mountains. The sound of the steam locomotive chugging through the cold March night is oddly comforting. Then the train slows and stops, deep inside a mountain tunnel. You wait, thinking it's just a short delay. Minutes pass. The air feels warmer, heavier, and then breathing becomes difficult. By the time rescuers arrive the next day, the silence is absolute. Over 500 people are dead, their faces pale and still, as if frozen mid-sleep. This is the story of the deadliest railway disaster in Italian history, and one of the most haunting tragedies of World War II. The year is 1944. Italy is torn in two. The Allied forces have landed in the south while German troops still control the north. The war has shattered the country's infrastructure. Food is scarce. Black markets thrive. Trains are one of the few ways to move people and goods through a nation split by conflict. Balvano, a small town in southern Italy, lies along a mountainous railway route connecting Naples to Potenza. The Army Tunnel, over 900 meters long, cuts through steep, rocky hills. It's a difficult stretch for locomotives even in peacetime, but in wartime, with outdated equipment and poor maintenance, it's treacherous. On the night of March 2, 1944, Train 8017, a mixed freight passenger service, departs from Naples. It is pulled by two steam locomotives and loaded with goods, coal, and passengers. Officially, passenger services are restricted due to the war, but hundreds of civilians, desperate to reach family, escape danger, or trade goods, have boarded illegally. The train is dangerously overloaded. Witnesses later estimate more than 600 people aboard, some crammed into freight cars, others clinging to buffers, couplings, even the roofs. The night is cold and damp. The steam engines work hard climbing into the mountains. Coal is in short supply, so low-quality fuel, high in moisture and impurities, is used. It burns poorly, producing thick, heavy smoke. Around 1 a.m., Train 8017 approaches the Army Tunnel. The gradient here is steep, 12.5 per mil, forcing the locomotives to work at full power. Inside the tunnel, the smoke has nowhere to go. The locomotives belch exhaust into the confined space, filling it with carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless gas that is lethal in minutes. Halfway through the tunnel, the train begins to slow. The combination of the steep incline, overloaded wagons, and poor quality coal robs the engines of power. The wheels slip, the train grinds to a halt. Steam engines need airflow to expel exhaust, but now they are trapped. Smoke swirls back, enveloping the crew and passengers. The drivers try to restart the locomotives, but with every shovel of coal, the fumes grow thicker. Carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin in the blood 200 times more effectively than oxygen. At high concentrations, it knocks people unconscious in minutes. Death soon follows. In the dark, passengers begin to cough, choking. Some try to open doors to get out onto the narrow walkway alongside the tracks. But there is no light, no fresh air. Those near the tunnel entrances might have stood a chance, but most are far inside, trapped. Panic spreads, but it is brief. One by one, voices fade. People slump to the floor, to each other's shoulders. In the driver's cab, both locomotive crews collapse. The fires still burn, the gas keeps coming. By dawn, the train hasn't arrived in Balvano. Railway workers investigate, entering the tunnel from both ends. What they find is horrific. Car after car is silent. Men, women, and children lie still. Some appear to be sleeping, heads resting on bags or knees. Others are on the floor, as if they had tried to crawl to safety. Only a handful survive, those who had been in cars closest to the tunnel's southern entrance. Even they are weak, disoriented, coughing violently. Officially, over 500 people die in the Balvano disaster. The true number may never be known. Many passengers were unregistered, stowaways in wartime chaos. Investigations reveal multiple contributing factors: overcrowding, far beyond safe limits, low-quality, smoky coal, steep gradients in the tunnel, lack of proper ventilation, poor wartime maintenance. But there is also blame placed, quietly,
on railway officials who allowed the train to depart overloaded and on wartime shortages that made tragedies like this almost inevitable. Because it happened during wartime, the disaster receives little coverage in Italian newspapers. The authorities fear panic, and besides, death is already everywhere. For decades, the Balvano train disaster remains a little-known footnote in history. Survivors speak of it rarely, their memories too painful. Today, the tunnel still exists, though trains no longer run through it. Locals say that on quiet nights, the wind through the mountains can sound like a distant steam engine, slowing, stopping, and then falling silent. The Balvano disaster reminds us that sometimes the deadliest dangers are the ones you can't see. A train, a tunnel, a night journey. Nothing unusual until invisible poison fills the air. And in the darkness, there is no warning, only silence.
On a warm spring morning in 1924, passengers boarded the Sunshine Express, a train meant to carry them safely from Toowoomba to Brisbane. Families, workers, students, all settled into their seats, unaware that their journey would soon become one of Australia's greatest unsolved mysteries. Because by the time the locomotive pulled into the next station, 2 of its rear carriages had completely vanished. The passengers, the seats they occupied, even the luggage stored inside, gone without a trace. What followed was a month-long search that raised more questions than answers, and a mystery that still haunts Queensland's railway history to this very day. Australia in the 1920s was a nation still finding its identity. World War I had ended only a few years earlier, and the country was rebuilding, balancing hope for the future with the scars of the past. Rail travel was central to Australian life. The Sunshine Express was one of the Queensland Railway's pride routes, a daily passenger service connecting Toowoomba with Brisbane, winding through rolling hills, small rural stations, and the dense bushland that defined the Darling Downs region. On November 22, 1924, the train left Toowoomba shortly after dawn. It was a warm morning, the kind of day where sunlight shimmered across the gum trees and the air smelled faintly of eucalyptus. The express carried its usual mix of passengers: farm workers, businessmen, women traveling to Brisbane for shopping, a few children heading to visit relatives, and several soldiers returning home from regional duties. The train was not overcrowded, but steady. Railway records suggest around 120 passengers were on board. It was an ordinary trip, at least at first. The Sunshine Express rolled eastward, its locomotive puffing white plumes into the clear morning sky. Passengers in the forward cars chatted quietly, while those in the rear settled into books, newspapers, or small conversations. The train's configuration that day consisted of a steam locomotive, followed by a tender, 3 passenger coaches, a dining car, and then 2 rear passenger carriages, the last of which was a slightly older model, wooden in frame, but still in use. The journey was smooth as the express passed small waypoints, Helidon, Grantham, and other familiar stops. At each station, a handful of passengers disembarked while others climbed aboard. Everything seemed normal. But as the train moved between Hutton and Granville, something inexplicable happened. When the Sunshine Express pulled into Granville Station, railway staff immediately noticed something was wrong. The conductor stepped down, pale and shaken. He quickly approached the station master, whispering urgently.
The train that arrived was shorter. The last two carriages were missing. At first, staff thought it was some kind of mechanical mishap. Perhaps a coupling had failed and the rear cars had separated. But such an event would have caused an immediate emergency. Passengers would have panicked, brakes would have engaged, and the missing carriages should have been found within a few hundred yards of the tracks. Instead, nothing was there. Rail workers backtracked along the line. There was no derailment, no broken couplings, no signs of wreckage or smoke. The rear two carriages, with dozens of passengers, had simply vanished. News spread quickly. Within hours, search parties were organized. Railway inspectors, police officers, and even local farmers scoured the countryside. The tracks were checked inch by inch. Bushland was combed, but there was no sign of the missing carriages.
For days, the region buzzed with theories. Some believed the carriages had been mistakenly diverted onto a sidetrack, though no such junction existed along the section in question. Others whispered about sabotage, suggesting someone had deliberately removed the cars. Newspapers picked up the story, sensationalizing it as the vanishing carriages of Queensland. Locals flocked to the area hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghost train. The search widened. Rivers and creeks near the line were dragged in case the carriages had somehow rolled off into the water. Patrols extended into the bush. Even Aboriginal trackers were called in to help. But there were no footprints, no broken vegetation, no wheel marks leading away from the tracks. The carriages and the people inside were simply gone.
Weeks turned into a month. Pressure mounted on Queensland railways, and rumors spread like wildfire. Then, in late December 1924, a shocking discovery was made. Far from the main line, down an old unused siding deep in the bush, the two missing carriages were found. They were perfectly intact, standing silent in the heat of the Australian summer. But they were empty. Inside, luggage sat untouched. Hats hung neatly on racks. Newspapers lay folded on tables, as if passengers had simply stood up and walked away. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no broken windows. Every wallet, every handbag, every personal belonging was still there. It was as though an entire group of people had simply evaporated. The discovery only deepened the mystery. How had the carriages reached that siding? The junction to access it had long been decommissioned, its levers rusted and locked. Railway engineers swore it was impossible for the carriages to roll there without deliberate intervention. Several theories emerged. Mechanical separation. Some argued the couplings failed and the carriages somehow rolled onto the siding. But physics didn't support this. The grade of the land was wrong, and there was no evidence of fresh wheel marks leading in. Sabotage. Others suggested someone tampered with the junction and diverted the carriages. But why? And where had the passengers gone? Mass abduction. The strangest theory, whispered late at night, was that something otherworldly had taken place. Witnesses reported hearing strange humming sounds near the line days before the incident, and some even claimed to see lights in the sky. Cover-up. Conspiracy theorists believed the government knew more than it admitted, pointing to the unusually fast closure of the official investigation. The Sunshine Express continued to run, but its reputation was scarred. Passengers began referring to the missing carriages as the ghost cars. For years afterwards, travelers swore they could feel a chill when passing the section between Hutton and Granville. Queensland Railways quietly dismantled the siding where the carriages were found, erasing its physical trace from the network. The carriages themselves were scrapped within a decade. As for the missing passengers, they were officially declared deceased in the 1930s, though no remains were ever found. Families mourned, but true closure never truly came. The Sunshine Express disappearance has never been explained. Historians continued to puzzle over it, while paranormal enthusiasts call it Australia's greatest railway mystery. Was it human error? Was it foul play? Or was it something beyond our understanding? Almost a century later, the story still circulates in Australian folklore. Some claim to see ghostly figures along the tracks at night. Others hear the echo of a train whistle where no train runs. And each time the Sunshine Express is mentioned, the same question lingers. How can two train carriages full of people vanish into thin air and return completely empty?
Imagine this, a bright summer afternoon in Italy, 1911. 100 well-dressed passengers board a train in Rome, excited for a scenic excursion through the Italian countryside. The air is filled with chatter, the scent of cigars, and the promise of a pleasant journey to L'Aquila. The train rolls out of the station, steam hissing into the clear sky. But when it enters a tunnel in Lombardy, it never comes out again. No wreckage, no smoke, no bodies, nothing. What happened to the Zanetti train that day has puzzled historians, investigators, and conspiracy theorists for more than a century. Some claim it was a tragic accident, others insist it was a government cover-up, and a few believe something far stranger, that the train vanished into another dimension or another time. This is the haunting story of the Zanetti train mystery.
The train belonged to the Zanetti Company, a respected railway operator in early 20th century Italy. It wasn't a massive locomotive, but a well-appointed excursion train designed for comfort rather than speed. The carriages gleamed with polished brass, velvet seating, and wooden paneling. On board were about 100 passengers, wealthy businessmen, families with children, curious travelers, and even a few clergy members. Many were eager to see the rolling hills and vineyards of central Italy. The atmosphere was lighthearted, almost festive. Conductor Enrico Rossi made his final checks, punching tickets and exchanging pleasantries. No one suspected that they were stepping into what would become one of the most bizarre disappearances in railway history. The train departed Rome around midday, its steam whistle echoing through the city. Witnesses later recalled how beautiful the train looked as it moved through the countryside, smoke curling into the summer sky. The passengers reportedly enjoyed a smooth ride as the Zanetti train made its way northward. Some played cards, others sang songs, while the children pressed their faces against the glass to watch fields and mountains pass by. Then, as the train approached Lombardy, the track led into a long mountain tunnel, one that had been in use for years without incident. Railway workers saw the train enter, but it never came out the other side. According to the official record, 2 railway employees stationed near the tunnel swore that they saw the Zanetti train enter, but after several minutes, there was only silence. No vibrations, no sound of wheels on steel, no whistle. Alarmed, workers ran to the other end of the tunnel, expecting to see the train emerge in a cloud of steam. Nothing. The track was empty. At first, officials thought there must have been a rock slide, or perhaps the train had derailed and was trapped inside.
Rescue crews rushed to the site with lanterns and equipment. They searched the entire length of the tunnel. There was no wreckage, no twisted metal, no burnt wood, no bodies. It was as if the Zanetti train had simply dissolved into thin air. Faced with growing panic, Italian authorities issued a statement. They claimed the train had suffered a catastrophic accident inside the tunnel, possibly an explosion or fire, and that conditions made recovery of remains impossible. But survivors' families were outraged. There were no signs of an explosion, no scorched rock, no smoke damage, no charred remains. Not a single bolt or scrap of wood was ever found. For many, the official version felt like a cover-up. Over the years, bizarre testimonies began to surface. 2 women living near the area claimed they heard screams echoing from the tunnel the night of the disappearance. A farmer swore he saw a rolling cloud of smoke emerge briefly from the tunnel entrance before vanishing into the air. Most chilling of all was a monk who later said he witnessed a ghostly version of the train racing across the countryside weeks later, silent, translucent, with pale figures inside. His story was dismissed as superstition, but it spread quickly. Decades later, the legend of the Zanetti train took a new twist. In Mexico, a group of doctors reported treating a small group of Italian men in the 1950s who claimed to have been passengers on a train in 1911. Their clothes were outdated, and they were confused about the date. Were these men truly survivors, or was it a case of mistaken identity? Skeptics dismissed the story, but for believers, it was proof. The Zanetti train had somehow traveled through time.
Some theories suggest the train slipped into a rift between dimensions inside the tunnel. Others propose that a magnetic anomaly or geological event could have swallowed the train, much like the legends of the Bermuda Triangle. Over a century later, the disappearance remains unexplained. Among the theories are government cover-up. Some believe the train was carrying secret cargo or political figures, and its disappearance was staged. Tunnel collapse. Perhaps the train was buried deep underground, though no geological evidence supports this. Mass hallucination. A wild theory claims witnesses never saw the train at all, but were tricked by false reports. Supernatural forces. The most popular belief that the Zanetti train passed into another time, another dimension, or another reality altogether. Today, the Zanetti train is often mentioned in books of unsolved mysteries and paranormal phenomena. It has become a ghost story told to children, a cautionary tale about the unknown, and a favorite subject for conspiracy theorists. The truth, however, is far more unsettling. No one knows what happened. A train with 100 passengers left Rome in 1911. It entered a tunnel in Lombardy, and it never came out. Was it an accident? A government secret? A tear in the fabric of time? We may never have the answers. And that, my friends, is the chilling story of the Zanetti train mystery, a case that still defies logic, science, and explanation. What do you think happened inside that tunnel in 1911? Was it a tragic disaster covered up by the authorities, or did the train really vanish into another time? Let me know your theories in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more unsolved mysteries from around the world. Because sometimes the strangest stories are the ones we can't explain.
Some stories are so strange, so unsettling, that they refuse to fade into history. This is one of them. In the 1960s, deep in the Soviet Union, during the height of the Cold War, A strange tale began to spread among railway workers, soldiers, and villagers who lived near the endless train lines of Russia. It was the story of a train that should not exist, a train filled with silent soldiers appearing out of the mist at night, traveling tracks that no longer operated, and then vanishing into thin air. At first, it was whispered as a ghost story to scare young conscripts, but soon the reports became too consistent, too detailed, and too numerous to ignore. This is the story of the soldier's ghost train.
The 1960s were a tense decade for the Soviet Union. The country was locked in the Cold War, building missiles, testing nuclear weapons, and training armies of young men who were often shipped off in secret to unknown locations. Railroads were the veins of the Soviet system, moving coal, oil, tanks, and people across the vast frozen land. But the further you traveled into rural Russia, the stranger the stories became. Railway workers spoke of phantom lights that glowed across abandoned tracks. Villagers near forgotten tunnels whispered about hearing the screech of metal wheels at night, though no scheduled trains passed through. And soldiers, tough, battle-hardened men, claimed they saw an entire troop train appear out of the fog, only to vanish before their eyes. The first written account came in 1963 from a small railway station near Bryansk. A group of track workers repairing an old line at night saw a massive locomotive rushing toward them. It was painted black, its windows glowing with a pale green light. Terrified, the men jumped off the track, expecting to feel the rush of air as the train sped past. But there was nothing. No sound. No vibration. Only a faint cold wind, followed by silence. The workers later swore that inside the glowing windows they saw rows of soldiers in uniform, motionless, staring forward, their faces pale as chalk. Some even claimed the men looked dead. Word of the soldiers' train spread quickly. Soldiers stationed in rural garrisons told the same story. The train appeared without warning, often near abandoned tunnels or old wartime tracks. Its lights glowed faintly in the mist, its carriages filled with silent soldiers. Some believed it was the ghost of a real wartime train, perhaps one that disappeared during World War II while transporting troops. Others claimed it was a Soviet secret experiment, a train somehow stuck in a time loop, endlessly replaying its final journey. The Ministry of Railways officially dismissed the rumors as alcohol-fueled imagination, but reports kept piling up. One of the most chilling encounters occurred in 1966 near an abandoned tunnel in the Smolensk region. Locals avoided the tunnel, saying strange noises echoed from within. That winter, two young lovers walking home from a dance saw bright lights inside the tunnel. Believing it to be a working train, they stepped aside. But as the locomotive rolled out, they realized it wasn't real. The entire train was translucent, like a reflection in water. Inside, dozens of soldiers sat perfectly still, their faces ghostly white. The girl screamed, and the train instantly faded into mist. She later refused to speak of the event ever again. Witnesses often describe the soldiers as wearing old uniforms, not of the 1960s wartime era, but the 1940s wartime era. Their faces looked lifeless, some even skeletal, as if they had been dead for decades. Yet there were also reports of movement. In rare cases, the soldiers turned their heads to look directly at the living. Railway guards claimed that when this happened, they felt paralyzed with fear, unable to move until the train vanished. One soldier, now elderly, later confessed in an interview, "I saw them once, near Kursk. They looked like my comrades,
Men who died in the war, but they were on that train, staring at me. I will never forget those faces. Over time, several explanations emerged. A wartime disaster. Some historians believed a troop train had derailed during World War II and was covered up by Soviet authorities. The ghosts were the soldiers who perished, doomed to ride the rails forever. A time loop. Others speculated the train was caught in some unexplained time slip, endlessly replaying its journey across decades. Psychological stress. Skeptics argued the sightings were the result of stress, exhaustion, and fear during the Cold War, hallucinations born from overworked soldiers and villagers. But none of these theories explained why the descriptions were always the same, even from people who had never met each other. The strangest twist came in 1968. A small military train carrying young recruits reportedly vanished between two stations. According to records, the train left Orel at 11:40 p.m., but never arrived at its next stop. Officially, the accident was blamed on miscommunication, but railway logs show no wreckage, no derailment, no trace. To this day, the train's fate remains a mystery. Some believe it became part of the Phantom Convoy, the very same soldier's ghost train that still appears on misty nights. Even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, reports of the ghost train continued. Hunters, hikers, and even railway photographers claim to have seen glowing lights in abandoned tunnels and heard the distant whistle of a train that no longer exists. In the 1990s, a group of explorers camping near an old line swore they saw a glowing train pass by at 2 a.m. Their photographs showed nothing but fog, yet every one of them described the same sight. Soldiers sitting silently in carriages, staring straight ahead. The soldier's ghost train remains one of Russia's eeriest mysteries. Whether it is the spirit of lost soldiers, a train trapped in time, or simply mass hallucination, the story refuses to disappear. And maybe, the next time you stand by the tracks at night in the Russian countryside, listening to the silence, you might just hear it. The faint whistle of a train that should not exist. The soldier's ghost train.
In the winter of 1975, a train quietly left Chicago, carrying 5 key witnesses under federal protection, destined for safety and new identities. But it never arrived. Its final, silent run vanished off the grid. No tracks, no signals, no survivors. This is the story of a railroad mission turned unsolvable mystery. What happened on the tracks that night? And who willed this train out of existence? On January 14, 1975, into one of the coldest nights of the year, Amtrak Train 105 departed Chicago's Union Station at 9:05 p.m., carrying not just ordinary passengers, but 5 high-priority federal witnesses under the Witness Protection Program. They were traveling coach class, accompanied discreetly by 2 federal agents. Their destination, secure relocation and new identities on the East Coast. The mission had been planned for weeks. The 5 witnesses included 2 mob informants whose testimony had already led to indictments in Chicago, and 3 former corrupt public officials who'd turned government whistleblowers. Each had received new papers, fake Social Security numbers, and cover stories. Federal logistics were meticulous: route, provisions, timing to avoid detection. At 1:47 a.m., the train made its last confirmed radio contact with the Joliet Dispatch Center. All cars intact, progress on schedule. Chicago had handed off responsibility to Indiana Rail Traffic Control. Agents aboard reported mild unease, but nothing unusual. Through crackling airwaves, Train 105 said simply, "All clear." But by 6:30 a.m. the next morning, Train 105 had not arrived in Cleveland as scheduled. No crew check-ins. Dispatchers began an urgent search.
Official attitude: derailment or catastrophe. But no derailment alarms had tripped. No tracks or cars stopped transmissions. Search and rescue units mobilized across Ohio. Crews combed tracks, bridges, tunnels, fields, and even riverbanks near the railway corridor. Helicopters scanned from above. Railroad inspections found no sign of broken ties, malfunctioning switches, or derailed cars. It was as if the train had simply vanished. Family members were notified. Panic spread. 5 witnesses once under federal protection were now unaccounted for, and so were the agents. The Justice Department responded with rare public statements urging patience, but Washington quietly elevated the incident to a national security emergency. The FBI and Amtrak conducted parallel investigations, internal signal logs, rail sensor readings, staff interviews, but control tower data showed no divergence, no misrouting. None of the automated track sensors flagged irregularities. No emergency alert had been triggered. Trains before and after reported pass-through, but no handoff of Train 105. A troubling inconsistency emerged. CCTV installed at one rural Indiana station showed the train passing at 2:08 a.m., but only the locomotive and first 2 cars appeared. The final 3 cars, where the witnesses were seated, were gone. Train 105 continued slowly for a mile, then vanished from both video and radar logs. Investigators dug through maintenance records. That section of track had been free of incidents for years, no dereliction reports, no sabotage disputes. Engineers confirmed there were no known blind spots, derailment hazards, or missing equipment. Washington demanded answers. Internal committees convened. Classified memos leaked to investigative reporters who published tentative stories about a possible mob hit. One unofficial informant whispered that the train had been intentionally interdicted, but the official position remained: insufficient proof. Months later, half-burned debris was discovered deep inside a former rail spur near Terre Haute, Indiana. Charred metal fragments, railcar identification numbers partially legible, suggested cars 7 and 8 had been intentionally stripped of identifiers. But the debris field was small, inconsistent with a crash. No bodies, no luggage, no personal effects. Toxicology labs found no trace of passenger DNA. The appeared had consumed nearly everything. But experts noted it was not high-heat derailment damage, it looked like controlled burning. The spur had been decommissioned for decades, no rail traffic, a remote staging ground. Meanwhile, agents who had booked the witness relocation couldn't explain why the protected passengers had been placed in the rear cars. Usually, higher-profile witnesses ride among escorts in the front. Records showed cost-saving measures had truncated agent coverage to the locomotive and front cars, leaving rear cars light, an uncharacteristic deviation from standard protocol. Public speculation grew wild. Some claimed a hostile intelligence group or rogue federal officials hijacked Train 105. Others pointed to organized crime syndicates retaliating against the witnesses. One theory: the train was diverted onto a side track and intercepted by local militia backed by unknown interests. The Justice Department eventually released a limited report. The train disappeared without mechanical failure, sabotage, or malfunction. The rear cars detached intentionally or were removed and erased from all systems. No credible investigative leads. It concluded with an unsettling note: the rail system was compromised, at least that segment. Decades later, retired FBI agent Helen Wu, who had reviewed the case archives in 1999, gave an interview. They knew exactly who was on that rear car, and someone didn't want that testimony coming forward. Whatever or whoever orchestrated it, they were methodical, organized. In the absence of survivors or witnesses, no prosecutions were ever brought. The official case was quietly closed in 1978. Families were offered sealed settlements under national security, and the rail route quietly altered. Records regarding witness protection travel method for years after were heavily redacted. Investigative journalists returned to the case in the 2000s, mining declassified memos. They discovered references to a shadowy group known only as the Division. No names, no operators identified. The Division appeared in internal DOJ emails as a threat to witness relocation programs, never confirmed but never denied. Suspicions lingered that political figures with connections to organized crime interfered. Some congressional staff memos hinted at involvement of state-level politicians in Indiana or Illinois, but no subpoenas were issued and documents were sealed. In 2015, a whistleblower surfaced, an ex-railroad signal technician who claimed that he'd rerouted rail cars using a suspended switch the night of the incident. He alleged bribes from a third party to isolate the rear cars onto a cut track, then arranged for them to be towed away hours later to the isolated spur where they burned. But by then, the statute of limitations had expired. The whistleblower refused to identify the client. He was granted immunity and vanished from public view. No new leads emerged. The missing rear cars, the witnesses, the agents, they were never found. The train locomotives and front cars remained in service, but the rear cars were scrapped from all records. Today, the silent run remains one of the most chilling, unresolved failures of the justice system. A rail mission designed to protect truth witnesses became a vanishing ledger in a deeper conspiracy. Some families still hold memorial services each January, light candles on frozen platforms beneath the tracks, and publish missing person photo boards at train museums. Their efforts draw occasional press donations. Few listeners, fewer answers. New policies now require armored witness transport, digital tracking of rear cars, and real-time monitoring, but the wounds remain open. The ghost of Train 105 looms over every future relocation. This is more than a mystery. It is a lesson. Systems built to ensure safety can be manipulated by shadow forces. When the whistleblower finally vanished, Agent Wu said quietly, "They stole evidence, lives, trust, from the tracks to our courts." And as freight and passenger trains rattle through the night, remember, in the darkness, truth sometimes rides alone and disappears before dawn.